back to the Tabletop Squadron Con 2020. We have the next talk. Welcome to the group World Building Through Character Creation panel talk extravaganza. We have Aaron Catano-Saez as our special guest, and I'm going to just let Aaron take it away. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Catano-Saez. I am the co-creator of the world building, storytelling, and character creation podcast, All My Fantasy Children. And I'm also on the Skyjack's Courier's Call podcast, an all ages modified fate accelerated actual play. But yeah, and I'm excited because world building is kind of the only thing that I do in the tabletop space in terms of like contribution. It's like my favorite part of this is creating worlds and, you know, how to do it more mindfully and, you know, just how it can be more approachable is kind of my thing. And like ways to approach it that aren't just like, you know, you don't have to be a fantasy writer or like, hello, everyone, to write a cool fantasy world. So I kind of wanted to like talk about that today. If you have questions, feel free to spam them in the chat, like at any time. It's totally okay. I'm ready to chat with y'all and stuff like that because a lot of what I want to do ideally is build something with y'all. If like I want to eventually how I kind of like to work is the simplest way to do it for me, my approach to world building. By the way, there is no right way or wrong way. There's just the way that I like and that I've seen success, and I qualify that success as just having a podcast that I enjoy making with my friend. But yeah, and so my way of thinking is you can literally say anything. But if you justify it, if you find a reason to back it, you can fucking make anything you want and reasonable if you have a fun, you know, fun support to back up your claims. Or even if you don't, you can just make also, we got to crack a cold one seltzer just before we start. But yeah, it's all about just like saying whatever. Oh, introducing a new and an immediate question. Introducing a new and or unknown race. How would you go about it? That depends on the world, honestly. Because for me in my fantasy world, it's kind of like, hello. In my experience in fantasy anyway, I like to think of worlds as vast and like full of mystery, like, you know, our own. It's sort of like I try to encapsulate and try to think of world building and, you know, developing a world as how we see under the ocean, where it's vastly unknown. We have a general understanding and there's so much more to be discovered. But a lot of times when we talk about fantasy worlds or fictional worlds, you like to think that you, as the creator, narrator, whatever, know all there is to know about it. You know, that there's not more to be discovered. So introducing a new fantasy race, it could be, you know, they've been there all along. Or like, you know, there's always just like writing implements, like, you know, a Deus Ex Machina type thing where like everybody just arrives in a spaceship, you know, but it honestly, there's no right or way wrong. How would I go about doing it is say that there is a region of the world that is undiscovered, this is also a fun thing so this is a first chat point we'll talk about. When you introduce a new fantasy like race or culture or whatever, it's important not to go about it with like oh, thanks, Molar Duck. It's important not to go about it with like a colonial imperialistic feel, because a lot of the times it's everything we know about is like established and then everything else becomes like foreign and new and unknown and mysterious. And it teeters on how a lot of cultures used to talk about places that they discover just because they've existed the whole time. So it's a tricky thing to nail and get in a place that I always find to be good and that I'm comfortable with. So how I like to do it is like, you know, you just kind of fucking do it. Whether it's with like plot, you introduce people from another part of the world and their own experience, and you know, and you just kind of do it. You know what I mean? Like it's a strange thing for us to say like that there are stock, you know, races and and then there's the new ones. Like for me, it comes from a place that we're very used to, the idea of like DLC. where like you have your standard initial starter packs and then you discover more because like, oh, the mists of Pandaria from like, wow, they were there the whole time and we just didn't find them. They didn't, there's plot devices you can use to introduce things, but just make sure that it's not coming from a place of like somebody found them, unless that's your goal. Unless it's like you fucking, like there's always tropes like we dug too deep and we found elemental people, but it's about the next step that takes to avoid that gross colonial imperialistic type idea. Like in All My Fantasy Children, we introduced orcs. Base game has half orcs. Full orcs come in Volo's journal. I don't know what that means. But in our show, we had orcs introduced as like we had their origin story where it's like, they were this world faring culture that like traveled, that landed on fantasy in search of a new marine home, and they landed, they have their society, and that's it. They're introduced. It's because the temptation is usually, and it's in most writing, that there's a first contact story when you have new races and new cultures in fiction, that there's like, and someone found them, and it becomes some weird like Jane Goodall studying them person. It's like, I lived among them for years and learned their ways, and it's like, it's just so fucking gross. So I would say there's just avoiding tropes that are one-to-one with our own world are beneficial, but there's no wrong way to fucking, there's no like correct way. I would do it just by, probably writing like an audio drama about introducing. I would first try to focus on what their culture is and then fit it into the world. And then this is how it plays out in the world that you've already established, rather than someone from a default race discovering them, because if you want it to be, they just exist in this world, then you find their place in them. Oh, thanks. Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions? But like my thought with world building in general is that world building is fueled by the people who tell the stories. It's fueled by people. The world is shaped by, it depends on your world, obviously, but typically, especially if you're making a world for people to play in, characters, NPCs, PCs, where it's populated, the world is defined and shaped by the people who live in it, and not just physically, but like literally cultures form. And we take for granted the tropes of like dwarves like metal, and it's like, okay, great. And or like, the spacefaring cultures exist, and it's like, why was there like a, it's important to explain the tropes, whatever your trope may be. Like for ours, it's like worlds exist, these cities exist, and we had to try to figure out what made the weird trope of fantasy like isolationism, because a lot of the times it's like, oh, fucking elves are over here and fucking dwarves are over here. Why aren't they hanging out with each other? Like, it depends on the kind of world you want to make, but I personally wanted to make a world where everything is like, it's based on culture, not a monolithic society. So I know this is a ragtag. This is like, I'm talking in kind of circles, but typically in fantasy fiction, there is the city of the elves, the city of the dwarves. There's the world of the Hardrak, and only Hardrak fucking live there. I don't like that personally. It's monolithic. It's weird. I just think that you can be more creative. But if you have an integrated world and you have origins of like elves come from here, but dwarves come from this part of the world, thank you. You have to figure out what made them coincide. And that's when cultures and questions, you just keep always asking yourself questions, because if you're like, okay, if there's the city that the elves originated in, right? There's fucking dwarves living in it. Why are they there? How did they get there? Were they always there, or did they travel there? Because then you open up questions of like, okay, so clearly there's not conflict between fantasy cultures or races. Or if there was, what was it? Why is it no longer happening? And you'll slowly see your world develop to like, oh, I have a tendency to write militaristic societies who have a need for like conquest. I don't like that. I don't want to do that. Let's move away from it. We can explain the tropes. I would assume, oh, they know exactly where. But the thing is, it's not so much about like everybody knows them. It's more about you. I encourage everyone to create their own variant of them. Take a twist on it that's more creative than, that's more clever than usually like whatever D&D standard writers wrote or whatever Tolkien wrote. there's probably something that you can mine from that trope that's tried and true. Elves and dwarves don't get along. Like, okay, whack. Trope thinking you take for granted in creative. It's true. Um, and like you try to make your twist on it by going, okay, I don't like the fact that they don't get along, but I like the fact that they have different cultures because they are from different regions of the world. And then you're like, okay, do I want their cultures to be centered around their environment? Like, because it's cold over in fucking Jolly Moon, the elf city, then they have a value put on like fire magic and warmth and cozy and shelter and seasonal hunts and providing for each other and protecting each other. Rather, the dwarves live in the jungle. They live in a hot, humid, dense, unchartable world. And it's like, what are their challenges and things like that? And you start building from these building blocks who these people are based on where they are in the world. It's hard to build a culture without pulling from real world example. How do you go about utilizing that inspiration without appropriating or misrepresenting the cultures that you're not a part of? Because it doesn't have to be a one-to-one. Personally, I don't think it always has to be one-to-one comparison and drawn from. I always think that's a crutch personally, to be like the elves are secretly Hispanics. Like, no, I hate that. It's something where like you don't have to code your fictional cultures as one-to-one representations of the real world. You really don't. But by learning and or don't overstep. First of all, it's about the avoiding appropriation is like, don't overstep. Know what your boundaries are and where you should be going. If you feel like you're teetering towards someone you're not, that's a clear indication. So, but there's things that are universal about people that you can pull from. And that's where I like to come from. Like, our elves have a culture of, there is a tidal cycle that affects elves that is our kind of metaphor for like chronic illness and mental health, where it's like sometimes you're in high tide, meaning you're feeling strong and powerful and happy and good. Sometimes you're in low tide and you're weak and you're sad and you're, downtrodden. These kinds of things are universal. But then we go, what's something that humans should do? And ideally, you go, they would look out for each other. They would take care of each other. High tide would look out for low. It's not pulled from a particular specific world culture. It's human. It's us. It's something that everyone can tap into in some degree, is their humanity. And people all over the world experience similar things. And the more you learn about that, the common thread between all cultures in real world, the easier writing fantasy cultures and avoiding like appropriation, I think, begins, because you're writing about conflicts that people have, not based on like their part of the world and things like that. Because it also comes to the fact of like, I personally like to avoid skin tone, hairstyles, and things like that, things that give you a clear image and connect you with a one-to-one comparison to the real world. I like to avoid these kinds of things personally. That's me, because I want everyone to have their own image of what an elf is, what a dwarf is, what a gnome is, what a dragonkin is. I want you to have your own picture and not codify them based on skin tone, hair color, hairstyle, hair texture, things like that. It's something that I like to steer away from and stick to what is their culture? Who are they? How do they view food? What kinds of foods do they eat based on their region, based on their history that you build step by step? Like we were just talking about our elves, which live in this weird archipelago made of moon fragments by the ocean. So it's like, okay, clearly there's fishing. But if there was a time of, there was an ice age that they went through, it's like, okay, so is there a semblance of, preparation? Are there people who like to pickle, like to preserve, because you never know when something like that might happen again? Is that still a part of their culture? Yes or no? And you can always go no, you can always say yes. But it's about humans rather than pulling specific things from, like, it's not grocery shopping from IRL cultures. It's finding common threads that everyone shares across all cultures. And that's where I like to start to write from, not just like people are full of hatred, so there's combat, there's conflict. I'm like, what if there was an optimistic world where people don't go to war, where people, there's not this demand for violence against other nations and conquest and things like that. Like, what if you remove that? Then it removes a lot of other things, and you have a lot more space to play because you're not in the confines of like, well, in the real world, people do horrible things. But if you make an optimistic setting, like for example, all my fantasy children will say like, people do horrible things, but that is an outlier. Most people are trying to better the world and better their communities and help each other, which is it's human. You know, it's very not tied to fantasy. And that's what makes what I think better fiction and better fantasy is when the stories are universal. It doesn't, the setting is fun. The setting is amazing and fantasy cultures and races are amazing, but like the Godrak planet where everybody is, you know, has a nose this long when fangs coming out of their nose and they're shaped like this. You're like, okay, but what's their deal? What are they like? What is their worldview? You know, what's their planet like so I can get to know them instead of just putting a couple tags on fantasy races. It's about getting to know who they are, what they want, what people's dreams are, and what their culture is, you know, rather than just a couple labels that you slap on something. I prefer to just go deeper than simply like, you know, what they look like and, you know, this is the kind of fucking food they eat. Or like that they love war, because that's like a huge generalization, you know, and you can pull from stuff in the real world, but it doesn't have to be so strongly fucking coded as oftentimes fantasy is. And we're seeing a lot of companies deal with that and the fallout as a result of codifying everything from day one to IRL. And we're seeing how that can lead to catastrophe because people can just do better. There's just better ways to write it. Does anyone else have any other questions or anything? Because I'd like to, we can also, if you don't have any, I'd be down with just, you know, answering questions and shit like that. I totally am. And we can also like build a stupid world if you want, but it depends on what y'all want. You're here, you're hanging, you know, I'm down to chit chat with y'all. I'll wait a second for the chat to catch up. I'll take a sip. I also hope I answered that question well. Build a world. Okay. So I'm gonna need feedback from y'all. So we're gonna do this together. Wow, let's do it. Okay. So first of all, what kind of like setting do you all want? Let me open open my Google Doc that I've pre-locked and loaded. What's like a cool setting do you want? Sci-fi, fantasy, with an extinct oh fuck. Excuse me, Zaffini's going in hard. Extinct. So the first thing what we know about this world, extinct empire that was widespread. I love those. I love the trope and the fun thing of like there was a world, there's no longer that world, and now we are building something new on top of it. From it can, because it could be forgotten, it could be so far long ago, or it could be like we left that world behind, you know, like an active choice. But that's up to you. Extinct. I put exiting. Extinct empire that was widespread. Seeing the past and how it shaped the present is fun. Dope. Okay, so we move in past that shit. So what we know, what food is the most important? Okay, so we're gonna have food important. So let's just start real quick there. There's an extinct empire. Well, what if the empire did exist? What if they were like, nope, and left? That's different than extinct, though. We're going to stick with extinct because I think it's a really strong, that's a stronger word than like they left, you know? Extinct empire implies that we are going to have, and you know, we're moving past this idea of the need of an empire, perhaps. Like, so we have an extinct empire that was once widespread. The empire was called the Squadroni. The Squadroni Empire, because we are in the squadron right now. The Squadroni Empire used to be widespread. Cool. What does widespread imply? Just with this prompt alone, we can like start really cooking. Widespread implies that it can imply many things. It depends on what the planet is. Because typically widespread in fantasy is like they conquered and they took multiple planets is Lit City. See, And then it fell. Okay, good. So, so we know about the Squadroni. It fell widespread over multiple. Okay, so let's start just there. So that we know that the Squadroni Empire was widespread. We don't know how yet. We don't know what their goals were. We know they are no longer there. We know that the world has moved on and they want to move past that shit because seeing the past and how it shaped the present is fun. That is dope. That means people are informed by the Squadroni Empire in the present. The past is informing the present, which is dope, which means that people have history. They know about the Squadroni Empire, but they don't want that bullshit anymore that they were pulling. So it was widespread over multiple planets. Now, the question I have for all of you that I will ask is, do you want to go the way of conquered, or just like had an influence, or didn't take inhabited planets? It depends on how many planets are inhabited. If there's, tons of planets with life and people, in the Squadroni Empire, we're basically, the evil empire from fucking Star Wars, and we're like total dicks and just like ruled them. They're influenced by an era of the empire, depending on what the empire ride. True. So, what are you guys thinking? Inhabited and occupied, but the planets say conquered. I want to take a consensus. What do y'all want to do? Were the Squadroni conquerors, but they only had access to the surface of the planet? That's an interesting. Do you like the idea that they are conquerors, or do you want it to be benefactors? Or were the Squadroni like, celestial type beings who like, terraformed, shaped meteors into, habitable planets? Are the Squadroni like, Deus Ex Machina type figures who like show up and then leave and we learn from them? Are they like gods, or are they just assholes? Space UN. Shaping planets, the Space UN. I kind of like terraforming, but doing it badly, then leaving when it didn't make what they want. Okay. Alliance. Let's be friends. Terraforming, interesting. I mean, they can both be assholes and shapers. Okay. So there's the alliance. What are we doing with the alliance? Talk to me about this alliance that we want to make. Is it just they had an alliance with the people that lived on these multiple planets? Is that that's the feel? Because what's interesting is the idea of terraformers and like, these beings, the Squadroni used to be here and, they helped terraform, but like they had a alliance with mutually beneficial setup where they landed in terraform. See, that's fucking dope. That's like, it harkens to me this idea that we have of like ancient aliens. Like exactly. It makes me think of that old theory where the Egyptians were so smart and accomplished because they had aliens help them, which I'm not a fan of, but I like in fiction. You can just go, yeah, it's that because so they were the Squadroni we know were spread out among it's offensive, but I don't like that trope at all. Like I don't like that theory. It's the worst. It's super racist and shitty. So what I do like from this though is that there are it's the worst. I fucking hate that thing. Ancient Aliens is usually super fucked up. P.S. So the idea that the Squadroni came widespread across multiple planets. We know this, right? And we know that they arrived on certain planets and terraformed them. Like we use that word and we love that. Like that word's dope. I love that word. It sounds good. It sounds good. You said they landed and terraformed and formed an alliance. And then Demon Nicodemus said, like, also made the inhabitants stronger. So what I like from this is that it's sort of this benevolent, there's a benefactor feeling about that. But what do the Squadroni want from these planets? You know what I mean? What was their goal, from doing this? Was it just because because my not favorite is like the simply benevolent figures who wish to bless. I'm like, like what do they get out of this exchange? A very special resource. Okay. So the Squadroni, perhaps they need something because if you stay away from, usually it's like, trade negotiations. They want to protect the future of other planets. They want to get them good foods. Okay. Okay. So what I like from all this is let's go with the Squadroni are this empire. They're an extinct empire of culinary. Exactly. They're extinct. The Squadroni Empire is an extinct empire of beings who were widespread across different planets. And when they arrive on a planet, they broker a deal. They say, if you give us all of your dope treats and best like fun foods, it's not take, because I like the idea of like, I need to have this rather than I want it. And so I'm going to take it. Because if you remove greed and you make them nice, or not evil, it's just like, if you give us the most bomb ass treats that you could possibly imagine, or recipes, so we can I fuck with recipes, because that means that they're taking information and like it would be this like giant cookbook of the galaxy that they're building. So I like that the Squadroni show up and they're like, can we have 10 recipes from your world? And so that we may take the best of your world and like the best foods and we'll learn a lot about y'all and how you eat and all your treats, because it's all I'm fucking interested in right now is your food. It's all I need from you is to learn from your food. And in return, we will terraform your planet. We will give you fucking dope bennies, like longer life, fucking magic powers. The capital planet is indeed Flavor Town. The idea. Well, okay, this is a long one. I'm going to read it though. I'm kind of into the idea that planets were terraformed to create resources they needed that were finite on their planet, crystal fuel. They made alliances with species, cultures that were sapient and having shaping less advanced and evolved species into anything they needed. See, that the more, yeah, exactly, that for me, I'm like, I don't like the idea of a sentient being like turning people into something that like it borders on like body snatching, and like it's colonial. It's the idea of like you go and you spread your doctrine to the world. I'm like, I like the idea of just an exchange, and we get recipes, we give you this dope magic power in terraforming, and then we go about our way and we leave behind, and it's an equal transaction, because these Squadroni get a piece of that culture, right? They get recipes and they travel with it, blah 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 blah, and the people that are left behind are given a pet piece of the Squadroni, this maybe longer life, dope terraformed world, fucking, I don't know, I hesitate to say technology, but like magic fucking powers, cool. And then they leave. So it's a both kind of like there's an equal exchange here. It's not just taking and leaving. So it is this, okay. And legendary sharp knives, the only use for chopping up ingredients. Everyone steals across this tough chicken. So what's important is that food is important to the Squadroni, because it tells what? For me, I think of like it tells the story about a world in 10 recipes or less. Exactly. And there becomes an intergalactic cookbook that the Squadroni have. And I like the idea that because they're extinct, because there's no more of the Squadroni Empire, it has become something of like they have lost somewhere in time. Is this intergalactic cookbook, this, catalog of the cosmos, so that you can learn all about these fucking planets if you had this goddamn cookbook, but they're gone, they're extinct, and so we don't have it. But we also decide that we're moving past the Squadroni ship. The place can be so well conveyed in what they eat. Exactly. That we can know so much about these worlds just by their 10 recipes or less that are in this intergalactic cookbook created by the Squadroni. But y'all said that we're moving past they're gone. The planets are left, they've been terraformed, they have been shaped. And now that we're moving on, like we're moving past that world, what about the planets now, though? Now the Squadroni are gone, their recipes, the world's recipes. Yeah, exactly. They're fucking these benefactors with this power that they bless your world basically in exchange for cookbooks that they take, from you, or, you give them in exchange for dope power. They're gone. And now we're moving on past that. Does that mean that, have people destroyed their terraformed worlds? So I'm behind the convo. That's awesome. Maybe they still have the cookbook. Who? The Squadroni? Because if they're extinct and there's ingredients that are just legend. See, I'd like that. How did the Squadroni affect the worlds they touched? They like gave them dope. I think it varies. I think the fun part would be if we were to continue writing this, we would find out planet by planet what the Squadroni gave to that world. And that's what I think would add a lot of fun variety to this world that we'd be building. What if recipes use an industry? That's so fucking good. Oh my God, your name is R0305280. That's a bomb fucking detail. You know what I mean? I think that's how language was communicated between the Squadroni and these planets that were visited, was the exchange of culinary practice. It wasn't like written on a fucking piece of paper. It was like the Squadroni come down, whatever their form was, they hang out with you. And you're like, this is how you make fucking rice and beans. You chop up this shit and boom, you put it in the pot, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, interesting. I want 9 more from this planet. Travel around. This is fucking dope. I really like that it becomes not so much a cookbook, but like it is a cookbook, but it has like step-by-step instructions and it's all oral. It's all like an oral tradition, and they learned by listening, and like they might have, so it might be recorded. It might be lost. You know what I mean? It might, if it's all oral tradition, it might be lost to time or just past. You know what I mean? Do not wash the rice. And it's a very interesting thing because the fun part would be finding out the blessings that were left by the Squadroni. That's like a fun detail. That would be fun. This is like my whole point, is like leaving the most open for yourself to fill in, and develop, because what you have now is this huge variety of worlds because we didn't make a generalization. Wash that rice. Always wash that rice. You don't make a gross generalization of each world. You say this world that was touched by the Squadroni already had a culture. The Squadroni just got to share with there and learn. It wasn't like, and then when they leave, it's what is it now? And then you're like, okay, well, that world, the one that, there, and you'd be able to build a world, which is kind of fun thought that I kind of going to jot down for my own self. Build an entire culture inspired by a few recipes, because you'd have so many details to mine. Oh yeah, before you cook, not after. You know what I mean? Because you'd be able to build an entire culture inspired by like a few recipes. Like, you know what I mean? You'd be able to start really, because it's all about spitballing. It's all about sitting down with like, either yourself or people you trust and mining details. Like, it's all about, if you think of these worlds that are yet to be formed in your head as like a big chunk of fucking ore, what you're doing is essentially mining every bit of information that you can from that chunk in order to make a more polished idea, because that's what we did. We started with the Squadroni are fucking, they have conquered and widespread. They're widespread. And we mined our little detail that like they weren't assholes, that they just had an influence on other worlds, not a conquering type thing, that there was an alliance. And we mine. What does that alliance mean? You keep breaking it down into smaller and smaller components. And then soon, like the next thing you fucking know, we have a pretty dope like galaxy here, where like this whole galaxy, this universe was blessed by this long gone species who has a library of information about fucking every planet. That's fire. To me, I'm like, that's good, because then you'd have a lot to build off of. It's not just like throwing, you're not just winging it. You're like, all right. And then you have the wide variety that you're not limiting yourself. You could just be like, all right, and let's get to this again, but let's learn about planet Quang. Planet Quang, 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 and they put a J in there too. You know what I mean? So the story that would be super interesting to me from this setting would be the time the planets made contact. I'm like, why the heck does this planet also have? Yes, and that's like, see now, and that's when you start making the connections from all the other things that you've been mining, and that's when you start really cooking with fucking gas. Because it's, if I said this, if this is true, then this is also true of this fact, and then those two get married and they make another idea. But like For example, like Planet Quanj, you like, okay, you're like, okay, so Planet Quanj uses, a lot of sweets and sugar and cinnamon and warming spices and stuff like that. And you're like, okay, that to me is very cozy. That's very like fall, autumnal. Maybe the weather is cozy, or maybe people enjoy their coziness because it's hot as fuck like the rest of the year, but there's like 1 month of perfect cozy weather. Like, you know what I mean? And like you start building and building and building because we're really getting in there. We're getting in there. I appreciate this. This is dope. So the Squadroni are fire. Cilantro is great, by the way. But the Squadroni is dope. I think we honestly have successfully built a little world, and it happens quick. It can. And it's just about, for me, trusting your instincts to be like, what's there more to deduce? What's there more to break down? What's there more to find out about these people? You don't have to make like a snap judgment. You can just figure out, like, and eventually you're going to make a decision. And like, why is it, widespread? Why is it extinct? What happened to them? Then you go, oh my God, what happened to them? They fucking left. They have no need. And so they faded into the ether. They got every recipe that exists. But I fuck with it. I think this is really good. Now, with the time we have left, I would love to open this up for questions. Does anyone have questions that we can talk about? World building, about podcasting, about creating a world and maintaining things and creating lore and keeping it consistent and shit like that. Because that's my job on the show, is being like, we said this 100 fucking episodes ago, so we got to make this, certain recipes that were first. See, that's dope. Exactly. Yes, like you could have care, and that's when you start going, okay, who are the people who inhabit each fucking planet? Like there would be a historian being like, wait a minute, we were blessed long ago by a long extinct. You could find their entire path, of by following the journey, like, by following the journey of recipes and tracing back the origins of certain foods that have mixed and matched over generations by like the Squadroni, and things like that. And you learn, and these are things that are like pulled, they're kind of inspired by IRL, but you're not lifting. You're not like just saying it's 1-to-1 the same, How do you keep track of all the details in the worlds you create? Is there an organizational method you prefer? Re-listening to your podcast. And also I jot notes. I have 9 notebooks full of notes, and I try to write down as many things as I can. I really try to write down as many key details as I can that are important to try to solidify. That's for me though, because I like to, if I don't write something down, it's less solid. And how do you handle continuity errors when you encounter them? Address them. I like to address my continuity errors because it's the shit. My podcast itself is a creative writing exercise, essentially, where me and Jeff sit down and we develop a new concept like we just did here. And if you come into a inconsistency, you can also, I like the trope that we made up a long time ago of like, history is funky. History isn't always accurate. Who told what story might not be the complete picture. Time is funny. How does time work in your universe and things like that? We are a bit lighter hearted, and, we like to imply that since magic is a force that is wild and unpredictable, that like a lot of things are possible with magic, paper and digital notes. But and so when you encounter an inconsistency, you address it, and then you can also figure out like a way to work it in and twist it and shape it, where you're like, okay, I said before that magic was created by Steve Butterman, a fucking person, and then later on you're like, and magic was created by ley lines, and you're like, oh fuck, I fucked up. But it's like, okay, but who is Steve Butterman now? Let's retcon. Like, don't be afraid of fucking retcon. Major franchises retcon. But we think of like our worlds and our lore as this infallible fucking tome that can't be changed, when major franchises retcon all the fucking time. And like, don't be scared to do it. But yes, that's how I would say it, Justin. And how do you handle continuity errors? Do you have a favorite type of notebook? I like these. I have a fuck million of these campus notebooks because they're colorful. They're really bendy, so they crunkle up nice and then maintain their form. I like them, so I can throw them in my backpack because I like to write notes on the subway. So I keep one in my backpack all the time in case an idea comes to me and jot it down. Um, how does time work? Fuck, should I know? Um, can you predict proactively plan continuity, like stub out a branch later? I mean, you don't have to worry about it. It's step at a time, step at a time. I like to put a step at a time or a story at a time and see where it fits and things like that. Because if you're, I like creating a world, so I'm like, I want, a story at a time, and that helps me develop the next story. It informs the next story, it informs the next story. But the idea of setting up like a canon timeline that's locked in and perfect, I'm like, I can't do that. That's not what I enjoy doing. I like finding a story by story by story by story, by person by person by person, and each one a little detail will help me flesh out the world a little more. Crunkle Factor 10. What thing have you created that surprised you, and how did you deal with that? So for me, it was something that surprised me was early on in all my fantasy children. I had a lot of ideas that were what I would consider not great now. Um, I had written this thing about like, because I wanted an interesting human creation story. Because we had fantasy cultures and races like dwarves, elves, dragons, beast folk, halflings and shit, but no humans. And I was like, how are we going to introduce humans? And like, I wrote some story about how like they were created. I was watching a lot of Full Metal Alchemist, but then it became what we talked about earlier when it was like the humans were used as soldiers by the dragon people. And I was like, I hate that. I hate that. I don't like that. I don't like being mean to my fantasy races, but also I was like, there's something better that I can do from that. And retconning it is honestly surprised me, the ease of being like, I want to change that on the show. Like, I want to change that. And they're basically made by two people loving each other very much and like magic light beams. Like, we just retconned it because I didn't want I realized that there was something that I didn't care for that made me uncomfortable in our own work. And so I was like, let's get rid of that. Out it went. And it's benefited the work by addressing it and retconning it actively. Yeah, thank you. Like, the human origin is really strong, and that I think came from understanding the weakness of the prior decision. The prior story beat was weak, and we made something better as a result. Anything else? Anybody else have any questions? We have 7 minutes left before I have to skedaddly doodle because the Star Wars game show is next, and I don't know anything about Star Wars. Yeah, if you have any questions about making things or storytelling and creating these stories or character creation, and what has been your favorite factor about your own world, like my favorite thing, it's our magic system is not a magic system. No, but it's like the fact that magic is in every molecule. It makes up everything. Like, the magic is comprised of 5 beings of creation that enter the world and create a world as a result, like by in their so magic is in every molecule of everything. So the favorite thing that I like about it is saying, if you say that, oh, okay, and that's true, what is spellcasting then? If everyone has latent magic ability because they're made of fucking magic, that means, are they bringing it out from themselves and projecting it outwards? Or are they, essentially bending like an Avatar Last Airbender, where you're manipulating already existing forces and shaping them? And it makes you fall down this rabbit hole of the possibilities of magic by keeping it so broad, as magic is in everything. Every rock, person, tree, air molecule is magical. So I love, that's my favorite thing. If you don't know the Star War, Aaron, say Koran Horn. What the fuck? If you don't, the Enterprise is a pretty cool ship. My favorite Star Wars captain is probably Picard. Yeah, magic is a fun system. I would say not. It's tech. It's like what tech noir has tech. Like, tech worlds have tech, and science fiction usually uses tech as their like magic, unexplained force. And I like the same thing for that. That's for the quiz show. Oh, what is Star Wars? I don't know. But yeah, my favorite part of the world is always magic. I always love learning what other people are doing with magic. Um, you know, how do you interact with the world around? It's always good. Exactly. Oh, it's so fucking good. Yes. And like, how do you fit in? That means that, and it creates this fun thing for me that I love, that everyone's connected by a common thread. in our world called fantasy. Everyone's connected by a common thread called magic. Everyone has something in them that they can relate to and, connect with. They are made of literally the same shit. And they go through the same shit. Blah, 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 blah. It's a fun thing. What about magic in relation to technology? They can work alongside each other. They don't have to be mutually separated, or they can be separated. And that's also interesting. I ask myself this a lot, where I'm like, what makes, it depends what the power source of the tech is and stuff. Because magic tech is technology fueled by magic, but you can also have tech, something that's made by like gears, an energy source, electricity. At the end of the day, if your world, everything's magic, everything still is magic. The electricity would be magic. The water wheel's magic. The power is the thing. So, but it depends on what your world is. That's the fun joy of tech and magic, that they can hang out together and not just be magitech steampunk, type thing. They can be vast and varied depending on your level of creativity, depending on what you're like able to, what you allow yourself to apply and dig deep into your own bullshit, into your own fiction, is how far you'll get from your own source material. But if you say like it's magic and tech and they exist, I always find it's more fun to dive into my own bullshit and see how much I can mine from that juicy ore, from that metal. Yeah. Yeah, we have time. I like I built the gun that shoots magic, like Final Fantasy Tactics. Gee whiz. Yeah, we have time for one more question. Does anybody have a question? Make it a good one. Yo, Final Fantasy Tactics is my jam. It inspires almost everything that I do. Final Fantasy clearly is like my favorite thing in the world. But anyway, we have time for one more question. What's your favorite recipe to cook? My beverage of choice, seltzer water's bomb. I really prefer Canada Dry. But me, that beverage is my favorite. That beverage. My favorite recipe is probably Oh, there's this really bomb and easy. There's a seared scallop dish that I really think it's easy. You can make this really simple, like corn puree with really nice corn with a little bit of blue cheese folded in. And that adds like this spice and creaminess. And then you just a little dollop of that, like on a plate, like you'd put several of these down. And it's like this creamy corn puree with a little bit of heat from like blue cheese. And then you sear a scallop on one side hard as fuck, drop that on there, and then you render, what's it called, pancetta, put a little bit of that on top, and then a little more of spicy blue cheese, and it makes this sweet spicy thing like that. Is Ignis from Friday? No, Noctis. I straight up cosplay Noctis. King Noctis. I like Noctis the best. But yeah, that's my favorite recipe. Going to have to do that next week. It's a fun one. A spicy corn puree with a little bit, you put some jalapenos in there as well to add a little heat, because that's where the sweet and the heat comes from, because scallops are so sweet. And so you would sear it hard on one side, and then you make your spicy corn puree with jalapenos, corn, and like a tiniest bit of blue cheese, crisp up a little bit of pancetta, put it on top with a little bit of creamy blue cheese. It's like spicy, funky. And then just, it's like a quick, it's like, you would put like 6 on a plate. Yum. What kind of recipes should we give? Muffins. Yeah. It's kind of simple. It's simple, but annoying because, you have to make a corn puree. But yeah. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining me and this was fun. Like, y'all are super verbal and helpful. I was nervous that like, no one's gonna fucking talk. I can. Excuse me. I was excited. Thanks everybody for chatting. This was fun. Yeah. If you'd like to know more about me and follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter at Catano-Saez, all one word. My podcast is All My Fantasy Children on the One Shot Podcast Network. The Twitter is at AMFC_podcast. I'm also a part of an all ages Fate Accelerated podcast. But yeah, follow me on social media, hang out, and listen to my podcast, because it's basically this conversation that I have with someone who's super good at writing and tabletop. So it makes a fun dynamic. But yeah, thanks everybody for chatting so much. Y'all are great. And never forget Squadroni.
Never forget Squadroni. That is a great ending line. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us. This has been great. No
problem.
The crowd loves it.
Hey, the crowd's going wild. Oh, can I get some? Can I get F's in the chat?
Okay, so we got 10 minutes until the Star Wars quiz show, which me and Aaron are going to be teammates. We're not going to reveal our team name just yet. You will see during the show. Get excited. So we're going to end this stream. Join us in 10 more minutes and we will go live again. Thanks again, Aaron.
Bye, everybody.